Don't lose faith, for you're never alone. The God on the mountain is still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right. And the God of the good times is still God in the bad times. The God of the day is still God in the night. We talk of faith when we're up on that mountain. The top comes easy when life's at its best. But in the valley of trials and temptation, oh, that's when our faith is really good to the test. The God on the mountain is still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right. And the God of the good times is still God in the bad times. The God of the day is still God in the night. The God on the mountain is still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right. And the God of the good times is still God in the bad times. The God of the day is still God in the night. Yes, the God of the day is still God in the night. He's still God. For that. Indeed, God did rebuke Israel for just calling on Him when they were in trouble. That He is indeed our God all the time, and not just when we need stuff. Amen. If you would open to Mark chapter 9. I don't know how long we've been in this chapter, but we're finishing it this morning. We're going to be kind of closing out this conversation that Jesus has been having with His disciples in Capernaum here. A kind of collection of they're connected, sayings about discipleship and. But mostly the kind of appearance and inner workings of it, right? Because if you remember, the disciples, it started with this argument, between two of the disciples about which one of them was the best and that kind of thing. And Jesus starts teaching them through a number of sayings about humility, and as we talked about last week, about not being a stumbling block. And cutting sin out of our lives, All of these things that hinder, both our personal relationship with the Lord, and it'll hinder others as well. Those around us. Sometimes we don't realize that. We think sin is private a lot of times, but it has a way of slipping out and affecting the people around us. And this morning, Jesus is going to, with the passage we're going through, Jesus will teach us kind of what it is that disciples are supposed to, like how we are to affect the world around us. And the kind of the process that God uses to get us there. So I'm going to read Mark chapter 9, verses 49 and 50, and I'll pray for us, and we'll dive in. For everyone shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. Salt is good, but if salt have lost its saltiness, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves, and have peace one with another. Let's pray. Father, as we thank you for your word and your blessings, and as we try to unpack these passages this morning and what you were teaching your disciples, then God, I pray that you would give me wisdom and the words to say, Lord, and that I can communicate it clearly, God, and we would walk away, Lord, knowing more of what you expect of us, God, and how we can be obedient to that as your disciples, Lord, and followers of you. God, we thank you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. And so, the verse 49, for everyone shall be salted with fire. So salt and fire were two things still important today, but really important back then, and we'll kind of unpack what those symbolize, in Jesus' teaching here in a minute. But it says that everyone will be salted with fire. So Jesus has just been talking about fire a minute ago, if we remember last week, but there's a huge difference because he was talking about hellfire in the passages before this. And here, he's talking about being salted with fire. So salt, it preserves, right? It purifies even. It can be kind of a disinfectant almost. Well, not almost, it can. It can be a disinfectant and a preservative, right? The days before refrigeration, what did they do with meat? Well, they cover it in salt, and it helps preserve it, right? And so, so if you're reading this and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to be, purified and preserved, it says, with fire. So clearly it's not talking about hellfire, because that does not make any sense. He's talking about the refiner's fire, and the refiner's fire is not punitive like hellfire is. The refiner's fire purifies, right? And as we know from having hardly any rain in the last couple months or something, with the 4th of July that just happened, there was bans on fireworks like everywhere, and my wife and I tried to go to the one in Midlothian, and they delayed it for like an hour and something, hour and a half, not an hour and a half, a little over an hour or something like that because of the winds. And so even where they had fireworks, they had tons of firemen in the general vicinity, right? And what they were worried about with the wind is that it's going to head somewhere that the firemen can't reach before something happens. And so a fire can be a really scary and dangerous thing. I think California was on fire again recently, wasn't it? Every summer, I guess, almost it seems like. But yeah, I remember you saying that earlier. But anyway, there's in Colorado and all these places, and these it's really scary, and a lot of people are losing property and things, and when it runs out of control, it's terrifying. But fire in skillful hands, and when controlled, can do really amazing things. And and that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here this morning. Isaiah 48:10 says, so what is this fire exactly that he's talking about? Isaiah 48:10, behold, I have refined thee, but not with silver. I have chosen thee in the furnace of affliction. And you know, the affliction is a generic word, right? Like it could mean just your hard times. I think in this context in Mark, it probably includes persecution because Jesus has rounded the corner. You know, like roughly the first half of Mark, you know, Jesus is still kind of getting all the likes and shares on Facebook and everything, and everybody likes him and all this type of stuff. But he's turned the corner from that now, and he's headed to his death and execution. He is going to not find favor with the people for very much longer. He hasn't changed, right? But their reception of him is about to change, and so I think he's warning them a little bit, you know, of the things to come. All of the apostles except for John were martyred, and so they were going to experience martyrdom, persecution, affliction, etc. And so you might be thinking like, well, thanks, that's not very good news or whatever, or that's not very encouraging. But the fire, like I said, it's in the hands of a skilled person. Fire can do wondrous things. Zechariah 13:9, and I will bring the third part. That means kind of God's like remnant. He said, I will bring the third part of my people through the fire, and I will refine them as silver is refined. So see, we're not drugged through the fire to get burnt to a crisp and just like utterly destroyed. The fire has purpose, and that purpose is refinement. It says as silver is refined. So, you know, metals and stuff, they all have different melting points and all this kind of stuff, right? So if you have some weird mixture that you're not sure what all is in it, you know, you heat it to a certain point, some of them start melting off and others don't. You slowly purify things, right, over time. And so that's the kind of thing that he's talking about. Refine them as silver is refined, and I will try them, or kind of test them, as gold is tried. And they shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God. So you see their response out of all of the affliction and stuff. Their response is not like, God, why did you do that? What in the world? You know, their response was, Lord, you are my God. You know, like they understood coming out of it, like there's no mistake that God loved them. You know, it's like the loving discipline of a child. You know, where the discipline is not fun, but your child ought not to ever, you know, be confused about whether or not you love them. You know, like they should at least understand that, even though they don't like the punishment that's coming. You know, it's that kind of thing. Malachi 3:3, another famous passage about the same kind of thing. And he shall sit, that being God, he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he shall purify the sons of Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. So notice the ending there, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. After being purified, they are now in righteousness. You see that? So that's the trajectory and the goal, right? So the fire, though not comfortable, we all, I think, agree with that, but it's not comfortable, but it has purpose. And the Lord is skillful, has skillful hands, so to speak. And he will not allow you to be burnt to a crisp and totally overcome by these kind of things, but he is using that as a means to purify. It's a way of spiritual testing, so to speak. Sorry, I didn't mean to get closer to the mic. I'm trying to read the tab in my Bible like that. But anyway, Job 23:10. This is, if you're familiar with Job, you know he went through a pretty terrible ordeal. Lost all of his children, most of his stuff, plagued with boils and all of these kind of things. As the devil kept saying, you know, I want to test him and everything, and the Lord was allowing him. And that's another good point. afflictions and things are controlled by the Lord. Like the fire never grows out of his control, you know. And so what happened to Job only happened to him. The devil only had as much ground as God gave him. Amen. Like it wasn't that he had run amok and kind of overthrown God and his angels or something and was just wreaking havoc or whatever. Even in Revelation, when he wreaks havoc, he's allowed to. And because it's part of God's judgment, you know. There's still bounds, though, because he says if this lasts too long, nobody will live, right? And so he sets boundaries on it, you know. Even then, when he's kind of, we would think he's running amok, you know. But Job 23:10 says this: "But he," that being God, "he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold." Do you see his faith in that? Like he's saying, God knows like where this is going, and he knows of himself. I'm going to come out the other side of this like gold, like purified gold. And so, and he's in a terrible situation. He's got like boils and stuff. He lost all his kids, all his livestock, all this terrible stuff, and economic ruin, and his health and everything. Even his wife was like, "Just curse God and die. What are you doing?" And he said, no, you know, and now he didn't walk through the whole thing sinless, if you pay careful attention to what he says from time to time, but he didn't do it sinless. But in this verse, though, you can see his faith and saying, I don't know what is going on, I don't know how to explain it, what God is doing, but I know this, I will come out the other end of this. If he doesn't take me home, then I will come out the other end of this like gold. So the spiritual refinement and testing, faith is required in it, but greater faith is the result. You know, as you can see with Job, Psalm 17:3 says, "Thou hast proved mine heart. Thou hast visited me in the night. Thou hast tried me, and shalt find nothing. I am purposed that my mouth shall not transgress." Bold prayer by David there. But he understands what the Lord is doing. The tests like that prove you or test you, you know. Talk is cheap, right? Like, so we say things, you know, like that I'm living for the Lord and doing this and that. Well, God brings along afflictions and trials and things like that. So, okay, you said that. Let's see, you know. Let's see you do it, you know. And that's not to be mean. That's because if we slip up, then we know, like, okay, yeah, I need to recommit or whatever, and you understand, like, all right, that was shallow. I need to go deeper this time, and the Lord is gracious and again knows how to manage these kind of things. Psalm 66:10 says something really similar to that. So I won't read that one this morning. That's another kind of reference for the spiritual refinement by fire is a proving and testing of your heart and faith. Like, what are you really committed to? You know, like are you really committed to me as your God? And you know, when you don't understand things, you know, do you still walk by faith, or is it only, are you following me because things are going well? You know, will you still praise me even though things are not looking up for you? 1 Peter 1:7 says, "That trial of your faith being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ." So the coming out the other end of this fire, this refiner's fire, it will be into the honor and praise and glory of Jesus Christ. That how he took your faith from like down here to up here. You know, 1 Peter 4:12 adds this. "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you." We can get like that, right? Like we think we're the only ones that have ever gone through, you know, whatever situation it is. There's nothing new under the sun. I think there was some newscaster or somebody that said new news is old news happening to new people, or something like that. That kind of mentality. That he's like, look, not that the trial is easy, but you're not alone in this, and it's not strange that you're going through this. And for those of you remember reading through First Peter, their persecution was probably about like where America is at now. You would get kind of maybe verbally assaulted and things like that. Of kind of it's not yet violent. It's not like the Middle East or something like that of rejecting Islam and being beheaded or something like that. That happens over there. In different or in China and some of these other kind of places where they're thrown in jail and killed and stuff like that. But it was gonna get there, but it hadn't quite heated up to that level yet. And so he was telling them, though, even ahead of before it gets really really difficult. He's like, look, it's not strange that you're going through this. You're not alone in this. This isn't some strange thing that's happening to you. It's common to all believers. Those who really do follow the Lord and His leading will suffer persecution. That doesn't mean martyrdom or something necessarily, but it does mean that at some point you're going to butt heads with the world hard enough for somebody to say something about it. And that's not to scare you. I mean, the Lord says, "I will be with you always, even unto the end of the earth." And He gives grace and strength to deal with those kind of things. But because the biblical values are just completely opposite to what the rest of the world is. And we see that now in particular. If you went back. It's always been like that since the Bible was written, but the culture is tending towards rejecting Christianity as opposed to at least accepting. It used to be at least accepting of the values, maybe not Jesus himself, but the values, the morals, and now even that, is being rejected. And so, it's excuse me. So it's a common thing to have happen that when you really do stand for biblical truth, that you end up butting heads at some point with somebody. But anyway, going back to Mark, there's this. So everyone shall be salted with fire, so that fire will make you more salty, so to speak, to make you, to help purify and preserve you. And the second part of that verse, every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. You got to remember Romans 12:1 that says, we are to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. And then he says, holy and acceptable unto God. And so, we are supposed to live our entire life, every part of it, every facet of it, as a living sacrifice. Like you give every last corner and square inch of your life to the Lord. And His guidance and leadership, and that it is to be holy and acceptable unto the Lord. It says that is your reasonable service. That Greek word for reasonable is logikos. I think is where we get logical from. Like it is logical for you to do that in light of everything that Christ has done for you as a believer. It is logical for you to then turn around and give your entire life as a living sacrifice back to God. And so Jesus is referencing here Leviticus 2:13, which references, it says that all of your grain sacrifices must have salt on them. That was part of the Levitical law, and so he's referencing that those sacrifices, grains, were for worship. They weren't for atonement, right? That's the shed blood, the animals and things that were killed. But the grain stuff was for worship. So, in other words, kind of wrapping some of these concepts together here, our lives in worship to the Lord ought to be this. We ought to live our lives as a sacrifice, a worshipful sacrifice unto the Lord, and to be purified and offered up, and just totally consumed like those sacrifices used to be. I mean, just total reckless abandon and commitment to the Lord, that your life just gets burned up as a sacrifice to the Lord, and ends up being that sweet savor. You remember those verses from the Old Testament of an individual offering a sacrifice, and it says the Lord, it was a sweet savor, a smell, not in a physical, literal sense, right? But just the fact of what they were doing was right, and the Lord approved of it. And so we ought to live our lives like that, purified and offered up to the Lord in worship, in response to what He's done for us, and just live in just total surrender to Him. And in that way, it is like these salted sacrifices being burned up. Verse 50. Salt is good. Can I get an amen? Still true. Salt is good. It's useful. It was practical for them back then, because they would use it not just for seasoning, but to purify and all these other kind of things. It was useful. But he says this: but if the salt have lost his saltiness, wherewith will ye season it? Now that's a foreign concept to us, because when you go to the grocery store and you buy salt, it's completely pure. But here's what they used to do. They used to get a big bucket and dip water out of the Dead Sea and just go set it outside and let the water evaporate, and then that was their salt or whatever. So you can imagine that's not pure. So that's how they got their salt. And so it was possible for salt collected like that, if you had like a pile of it, and you take some of it out, and you accidentally took most of the real salt with you or something, that what was left was this impurity kind of, and that would not function the way that you want it to, right? And so what Jesus is warning here, what he's first saying is, because he continues, he says, have salt in yourselves. And so, meaning, we are to be, as believers and disciples, we are to be for this world what salt was for meat and things like that in the ancient Near East. We are to help, our presence ought to some extent purify, not in the absolute sense that only Jesus can do that, right? But we're our presence should purify and preserve. Think for instance, like maybe you have a colleague or something like that guy cusses like a sailor, tells dirty jokes, whatever, but he knows you're a Christian. When you walk in the room, he gets quiet, like that kind of thing. That you're stopping evil things from happening just by your very presence, and they know that you're a Christian. Now, if you join in all that kind of stuff, then he's not going to stop, right? Like, this guy's like, he's no different than any of us or whatever, and they just keep going, right? That would be the people that have lost saltiness, But that kind of thing, evil is restrained to some extent. Ought to be by the presence of the church, and that's one of the things with when we were going through Revelation, when the church leaves, man, everything, it just, there's no influence for good in this world anymore. And things just go south in such a hurry when that happens. But anyway, believers, we're to be to this world what salt was to food. And so salt was this mixture, like I was saying. And so you could have this stuff that it looked like salt, but it didn't work like salt. And so this is what Jesus is really warning us about is, it is possible to sort of look like a disciple, but not actually work like one. Like you could be someone who goes to church every weekend, and you could be someone who does all of those kinds of things, and yet you do not have outside of these walls that kind of effect on this world. And we all have our own little worlds, little spheres. You have your neighbors and your co-workers and your different people that you're around more, and that's, I think, where if you start thinking like, well, who am I supposed to be reaching for the Lord or whatever, just start in your world, and think like, well, who am I around, or who could I, intentionally meet that, like my neighbors or something that, maybe I don't necessarily do that or whatever, but, starting in your own world, you ought to have an effect like that, and so he's saying that, look, if someone, the quote disciple or whatever loses that influence, what good are they anymore? Actually in Matthew he says the only thing, what do you do with that kind of stuff? You throw it away, and it just gets trotted underfoot like it's totally useless. Nobody wants that stuff. I think he says even that it would mess up even like manure and stuff like that. I mean, it's just totally useless. And so, it's a very tragic thing to see that happen to a believer to lose. I don't think when he says, wherewith will ye season it, I don't think that means that that this kind of individual is utterly helpless and just like the Lord will show them no grace or anything. Like, I don't think he's trying to say that. I think he's just trying to say that the disciple that only appears like it but lacks that fundamental quality, that life-giving quality that ought to just come out of their lives, like when they lack that, they're useless, and that's tragic. But sometimes, and this is probably some of your stories, maybe even of backsliding at some point in your life, and then the Lord got you back on track and started teaching you these fundamental things again and builds you back up, and so the Lord has and shows grace in that way. So I don't think someone who if you're sitting there this morning and you feel like you're maybe not as salty, so to speak, as you would like, then pray to the Lord to help you achieve that. He would be more than happy to. But have salt in yourselves. Be that life-giving influence to those around you. Be that preserving influence. And then it ends, and have peace one with another. Like I said earlier, this whole discussion started with an argument, and it ends with Jesus saying, "Be at peace," which is fitting. And so all of these, there's a flow to what Jesus is teaching here, but that kind of peace that he's asking us to have, it comes from humble service. Right? It comes through, when I kind of wrap everything up, I'll go through more of the details of that, but it comes through that humble service, and it's disrupted by selfish ambition like the disciples were showing. It's disrupted by exclusivism, the kind of thing they were doing where they were kind of being mean to other disciples or whatever that weren't in their little group, you know. It's disrupted when we're kind of careless and we end up being stumbling blocks for other people. It's disrupted by our own sin that we refuse to deal with. And so, you know, he's saying, like, you've got to follow this collection of teaching. Sounds kind of random, but it all starts to fit together like a puzzle when you think about it. And so to kind of wrap things up this morning, the believer's will, it says, for everyone will experience this refiner's fire. Different ways, right? Like, doesn't necessarily mean persecution or martyrdom or anything like that, but it does mean, you know, in some capacity, it's going to crank the heat up a little bit to help purify us. And again, you just have to, in those moments, you just got to walk in faith, knowing that this is not some out of control fire, but this is something that the Lord is managing and working to a specific end, and that end is for your good. You know, like He's purifying you, and so believers will experience that in our lives. Secondly, our lives can then be, once we've gone through that fire, they can then be that holy, acceptable sacrifice to the Lord. And when we're in, you know, that place, we're going to be like salt. We're going to be that life-giving, preserving influence on the world around us. And then just by virtue of all of that, we'll be at peace with one another, both within the Christian community, but then to some extent with those in the world. Of course, Paul says, you know, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men, because sometimes, like, you know, it's just not possible. But you know, to the best of our ability, we're called to promote peace, right? To try to establish it, you know. So as we stand together.